right, everyone, please welcome Miles Markham, who is the developmental director for Trans Lifeline. Miles, thank you so much for being here. I heckin' appreciate you for all that you do, Lordy Biscuits. I know that I've got like double video on my screen right now. We're doing our best here, okay? We're doing our best. Miles, first off, thank you so much for joining me. And how's your day going?
It's going pretty great. Thank you for having me here. I have admittedly never participated in a stream, so this is my first rodeo.
That's
Uh,
okay.
so far, so good for me. So thank you. Glad to be here.
You're very, very welcome, and I also want to thank you because your organization is so incredible. As soon as I started reading about Trans Lifeline and about all of the things that you do at your organization, I knew that I had to start raising money for this organization because the 24-hour crisis line, the crisis line is so important for helping our trans siblings feel safe and heard, but also the other resources that you create are that you have, like the micro grants, and we'll get to what some of those are and how you help people. We'll get to that here in just a second. But first off, please tell me a little bit about how you got involved with Trans Lifeline.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. Like you said, Miles is my name, and I use he, him, or they, them pronouns. I am a transgender person. I would use the word trans masculine to describe myself. I also use the word non-binary, and I am somebody who grew up in the deep South as a queer and transgender person of color, and was in communities where there were not a lot of resources for people like me. I'd never saw myself represented, not just in my local community, but even in terms of media. I just felt like there were a lot of restrictions around experiences that were, more similar to mine. And so I also, had was coming from a lower socioeconomic background, and because poverty, was something that then continued to follow me into adulthood. I encountered Trans Lifeline for the first time once they started the micro grants program. So I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that in detail, but I was a person who received a micro grant from Trans Lifeline to be able to legally change my name and update my identity documents, which then made housing so much more accessible to apply for. It made employment so much more accessible to apply for. And from there, I became like a $5 a month donor to Trans Lifeline just to pay it forward. And then last year, a position opened up, and I'd been working in nonprofit in fundraising, development, communications for a while for smaller organizations. And so when this job had a vacancy, I jumped on it, and next thing I knew, I was working full time for Trans Lifeline. So that's my personal journey. Any other follow up questions, though, I'd be happy to answer too.
No, that's amazing, and I feel like I feel like this is how a lot of us get into the mutual aid space is we receive some semblance of help from someone, and then we're able to after we get on a little bit more solid footing, we're actually able to pay it forward. We're able to help more people, and we're able to feel more secure in ourselves. Then we can actually go and help others. And I feel like that is such an important part of organizations, peer-led organizations like Trans Lifeline. So tell me a little bit about these micro grant programs, because there's a lot of different things that the micro grants are able to do. One of which that we talked about a little bit was the name change thing. Let's talk about that process.
Yeah, absolutely. So the name change micro grants are sort of our flagship means of support, and so since 2017, Trans Lifeline has opened up an application process at the first of every month. And the window for applying is between the 1st and the 14th. So if folks live right now are interested in that kind of support for yourself or even for a family member, you can head to our website and go ahead and start that application process. We do award them on a lottery basis just because there is so much need. But essentially what that grant does is it covers all of the expenses that would be associated with you being able to legally change your name no matter what city and what state you're living in the US. We're able to provide that support. Depending on the state, the costs vary greatly. There are a number of programs and places, for example, like Washington State, where you can actually have those fees covered, depending on your socioeconomic status. However, there are other states where you're paying upwards $500 to have to make that change. For a lot of us, for me, that was not possible at the time. I was living in Georgia. And so what was so cool about that whole process too is it's more than just having a check cut to you. You're treated in a more kind of case management way where you are walked through the process. You're talking to another trans individual who's done a lot of research about what that's going to look like for you. If there's any kind of tips and tricks, around navigating whatever system you find yourself in, our operators are trained to be able to support you in that way. So that's the name change grant. We also offer a few different types of gender affirming healthcare grants for specifically trans women and trans femme people right now, but that is changed over the years. So depending on the quarter, depending on what partners of ours express wanting to be able to extend support toward, that micro grant can change, but the umbrella would be gender affirming healthcare. And then a third type of grant that we extend is through what we call our inside advocacy work. And so we are partnering with other trans-led organizations who specifically are working with trans folks who are incarcerated to be able to provide for them commissary funds and what they need in order to just have kind of basic quality of life while they are incarcerated. And so that is the third type of microgrant that we extend. All of this can be found on our website too. You can read up about the how and the why of each of those programs, but they are expanding. And so that is something we're looking forward to seeing in 2023, is the way that program and those funds can be creatively distributed. The heart of it, is to put money directly in the hands of trans people. We are the only national organization who is doing this. There's some local orgs who offer different programs like this. All of those are also on our website, but it's the redistribution of wealth is a part of the heartbeat of Trans Lifeline, and so the microgrants program specifically addresses and helps us live into that value.
I think something that really makes me very happy about your organization as well is how integral you believe that that those mutual aid programs and those community-based solutions are, how integral that is to helping queer people, because all of us find we all find community where we can, and we all find other people that are like us, and that's when we feel the most comfortable to come out, to be our authentic selves. We've had a lot of conversations on this stream about that specifically, and a lot of people within our community have come out because they felt safe. They came out to us because they feel safe. One of the things that I really, really love about your organization as well is the idea that we need to divest from policing, and that we need to find community solutions to community problems that do not involve incarceration. And that actually, I gotta say, I gotta commend you, because the way in which you help incarcerated trans siblings as well is just so necessary. This is a whole community that is completely overlooked by most of society. And there are many, like there are so many people that are incarcerated or detained in some way, and being able to reach them and to help them find that just a small modicum of dignity is so important and is so impactful, in my
Right.
opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, a cursory Google search, can let a person know just what types of harms anybody who's incarcerated experiences. And one thing that we talk about all the time is that is only exacerbated and intensified when you're a trans person, and depending on um, what prison you're in, your experience is going to change vastly. It's
And
not
what
great.
state too, and what
Yes.
state you're
Yeah.
incarcerated in. Yeah.
Not great for anyone, but it's one of the areas that we've been the most eager to be able to expand because, like you said, the way that we are socialized to think about prison and the way that we're socialized to think about incarceration is very quick to cast blame on a person who is a survivor, of structural violence in countless different ways. And so our intention is to be as present as we can to our trans siblings who are inside right now. And so, our hotline is also available, to folks who are inside. And so some of those commissary funds go to phone calls, to different letter writing campaigns, to different ways of staying in touch and being able to connect folks to somebody on the outside who understands, who cares, who can offer a shared lived experience to the extent that that's possible. All trans people are different, but yeah, the peer support is the most crucial, dimension of all the work that we do, whether that is through micro grants or the hotline itself. Having that affinity, the ability to answer questions based on your own life, your own experiences, and to illuminate the differences too, right? I think that that's something that also supports our well-being because we are different. And hearing somebody else's stories, the nuances of what they've been through, what they've survived, I think also instill a sense of pride, of diversity in our community and how many different ways, transness can look and transness can be. So yeah, I appreciate you appreciating that.
There's I don't know if you've ever heard of the Bisexual Manifesto. It was a thing from the '90s. We've talked about it in this channel many times before, but the Bisexual Manifesto was a part of Anything That Moves, the magazine from the 1990s in San Francisco. And one of the things that they say in that manifesto that I use as kind of a way for me to also think about people who don't identify the way that I do is there are as many ways to define bisexuality as there are bisexuals, and I think it's a lot the same with trans people as well. There are as many different ways to be trans as there are trans people, and we all identify ourselves in a different sort of way, and being able to have people, and this is one of the things again that I think is amazing about the organization, is that the hotline is actually populated by trans and non-binary people. There are actually, like, these are people that know they can empathize because they've lived this same experience as the people that are on the other line of the other end of that call. So they know that they can there's that intimate level of trust when you're speaking to somebody who has had the same experiences as you or a similar experience as you. And that's really just like that's it right there. Like that's the most important thing. Um, yeah, and as Corey says in chat, investing in the safety and support of trans youth, ensure that we have them around. The goal is not necessarily to make cis kids trans. It's not. I mean, it'll never be that. The goal is always to make trans kids into trans adults and to allow them to survive and to thrive. And I'm deeply happy that your organization is able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think along those lines, something that we often share with friends and family, because that's another thing. Our hotline does support folks who are not trans, but who love us. It is a callback number. You would call the same number, but you would schedule a time to set up a support call. And one thing our operators find themselves sharing time and time again is that gender affirming care is not to like push a young person in a particular direction. Gender affirming care is all about creating spaciousness so that a person can safely, comfortably, healthily explore identity and belonging and be able to make it to adulthood, be able to be a person who doesn't just survive their life, but is able to show up, for themselves and for their community and to experience, love, joy, purpose, passion, all these different types of things. And so, yeah, my excitement around this prospect is something that I try to maintain because when we look at the legislation, when we look at the targeted attacks on queer and trans people, it can get pretty bleak. But to have, yeah, allies, to have, other supportive community members go such a long way in ensuring trans futures.
Right.
So I appreciate that comment too, as well.
What is something that you believe or that you would like to see Trans Lifeline do in the future? Like, where would you see that the organization expanding?
Oh, that's a great question. Um, I I think the first thing I want to say is my dream of all dreams is that we build a world where Trans Lifeline doesn't have to exist, where we have what we need to flourish. That direct services, crisis services, all of these things are so dramatically mitigated that all of the other support structures and systems that exist um, haven't like carved out such a niche, or left out such a significant like body of work that we have to fill that
Mhm.
niche. So that's the first thing I want to say is the dream is to not have to exist. But living in reality, in 2023, coming off of 2022, which was a
Exhausting.
record-breaking year
Yeah.
for transgender legislation. Um, I know for us, we really want to expand the hotline. We've answered hundreds of thousands of calls, over the last several years, but it's actually only increased. And we can't answer the total volume of calls that we receive because the internal capacity just isn't quite there yet. And so, in terms of fundraising, being able to uh, really deepen, that program is a priority to us. Something I haven't mentioned yet, besides that family and friends hotline, we have a Spanish extension hotline as well. It's actually the only um, extension line for trans folks that are monolingual, so not bilingual Spanish and English, but exclusively Spanish.
Mhm.
We want to be able to expand that programming and specifically outreach to Spanish speaking communities, trans and non-binary folks, as well as families. Um, that is another area where we've seen a huge like uptick in demand. So that is a place we're trying to grow. And then, as previously mentioned, our inside advocacy program, being able to support um, uh, trans folks who are incarcerated, that is another way that we really want to increase our advocacy. Um, and the other part I will add to that, you've already touched on, from day one, Trans Lifeline has been carrying ourselves in a way where we live in a world without cops, without prisons. So a big part of what we do is refuse, non-consensual 911 calls. We're not geolocating you. We are not asking you to disclose. any information that would ever put you in a situation where you would be subjected to police, intervention or emergency services coming in a way where you've not asked and you've not desired. And so we're working on a couple different campaigns to encourage other crisis support hotlines to change their practices around that, because it's not serving anybody. It's especially not serving trans people. It's uh, specifically, especially not serving trans people of color. And so that's another way we're hoping to expand our work, is to be able to grow in our advocacy um, in those ways as well.
I feel like a lot of people don't recognize that in order for us to have racial justice, in order for us to have justice for trans people, we have to move away from the traditional idea of policing. It has to be more community focused, because otherwise, the unfortunate reality is that police almost always target minorities, people of color, and trans people of color more than any other populations. It's unconscionable to think that there is no other way to do this than to continue allowing this horrible system to continue.
Right.
And the way, in incarceration, the way that we touched on this earlier, the way that incarceration is specifically set up, that it's almost always about punitive. It's not about the rehabilitation, and rehabilitation is and should be the goal of incarceration. We should be thinking of it that way. Yeah, there are people that we don't want to, that may be a danger to society, but there are ways to rehabilitate them. We've seen other countries. I believe Norway is a country that is really leading the charge in changing the way that their incarceration system works, so that it's more about rehabilitation. And there's so much pushback in the United States, and it's so difficult, and especially to when it comes to trans rights. Like, obviously, we've been seeing a lot, as you said, a record-breaking number of anti-trans legislation that is just absolutely defeating. But this is where we come in handy. We are the people that will create those spaces for people who need that help. Ghostrat, you say, yeah, two things that Helpline should not do. The two things that Helpline shouldn't do: call the cops and hang up on somebody. And yeah, you wouldn't believe how often the American Suicide Hotline just hangs up on, and that's just unconscionable. And thankfully, it sounds like the Trans Lifeline does not do that. They focus on making sure that the person that they are on the line with is in a safe place, and we are not calling authorities on them, because that's not going to help anything.
Right.
What are I had a thought, and then it broke, because when you're talking about things, and when you get brain goes funny. Tell me a little bit about the advocacy arm of Trans Lifeline. How are we in? What sorts of advocacy programs are you doing or looking into doing that are helping to put those ideals into either legislation, or helping other organizations follow along with the ideals that we believe in?
Yeah, sure. Well, I will say, while advocacy has always been like in part, the way that Trans Lifeline has operated, it was only last year that we were able to create a dedicated advocacy program. And so that is something that is expanding. And like I mentioned, a huge focus right now is on expanding um, insight and understanding around the harm that non-consensual intervention causes to communities and trans people specifically. And so, for example, one way that advocacy is going to be able to be translated, into policies or into legislative measures is if we get data to be able to demonstrate exactly what the harm of these kinds of practices have been historically. And right now, the research is a bit sparse. And so that is something we're investing in. We're working with a couple different universities to be able to pull those numbers and to be able to show, in more like empirical ways, the way that this doesn't serve anybody, doesn't prevent crisis. It doesn't intervene in a way that leads to any semblance of like health or well-being, and actually in most cases only worsens or intensifies the situation. And so that's a big part of advocacy right now, is really working to change practices with other hotlines, but also, federally, like how we think about 911 and other historical forms of crisis, intervention and support. So that's a big piece of the advocacy. And then again, just around abolition, around ending industrial prison complex, and really looking specifically at the gendered nuances of that, and being able to spread the word, about how that has played out in the US specifically, but has implications globally too. And then the last thing I'll mention is not advocacy proper, but it is a piece of what we do, and that is through microgrants, being able to talk about economic justice, be able to present a way to orient ourselves to capitalism and to wealth in a way that builds, a different world, a different infrastructure. People often ask us about, why the microgrants are all kind of centered around those identity document updates. And I touched on it in my own story, but it's been proven over time that having an ID that accurately reflects who you are puts a person in a position where harassment, discrimination, and other forms of harm like that are dramatically reduced. I often tell people that you don't realize how much you're having to show ID or use ID until it doesn't reflect who you are, because I myself and other countless trans people have experienced some of the worst forms of harassment as it pertains to that specific documentation of who we are. And so yeah, to me, like, there's an advocacy piece of that, being able to work with services like the Social Security Administration to be able to change their policies to make it more accessible to update name, gender marker. And that's true with passports, that's true with driver's license, that's true with state-based IDs as well. So again, that's not like advocacy proper for us, but it is a huge dimension.
Yeah, it's a major piece of that puzzle of
Right.
of rounding out the help that you give. Um,
Right.
so if somebody is not able to donate monetarily, are there other? Yep, that's I had a feeling that was coming. Um, if you're
I
not
had it.
able, yes, I know. So unfortunately, this is the issue with Zoom is that we're limited to 45 minutes, but that's okay. So and I also know that your time is extremely valuable, so I don't want to take up too much of your day as well. If you don't are if you're not able to help monetarily, is there another way that our viewers or that other people who may be watching this could help Trans Lifeline continue their mission of helping LGBTQ plus people?
Yes, we are always looking for volunteers. One of the biggest ways we can be supported by volunteers, if you're trans or non-binary or gender explorative, you can volunteer as an operator. If you are not, you can still volunteer as a friends and family operator. But then another huge need we have for volunteers throughout the year is around research, just staying up to date with different state or local based policies around identity update documents. And so again, you can sign up to volunteer through the website. That is hugely helpful. And we enjoy that from anybody, independent of gender identity. And then the two other things I would mention are to be knowledgeable and stay awake, to the status of legislation that is unfolding at the local, state, and federal level. The organizations I would recommend just following their trackers are the Equality Federation and Freedom for All Americans. Both of them are providing real-time updates about these bills, and then they themselves are giving calls to action around like what you can do, what you can say, how you can show up, who you need to send an email or make a phone call to.
Mhm.
So that's huge. And then the second part of that is just to be vocal. Just like tell anybody and everybody who you share space with about your support of trans and non-binary people. I think it seems so simple, but it goes such a long way. I can't tell you what it means to me to like be standing in a line, for example, and hear somebody like talking about, oh, so and so like came out as trans. And I think that's so good for them. And I'm so happy and so proud of like just overhearing that in the grocery store does something for me still. And that kind of support, just open your mouth, type it out, like whatever, however you are communicating, expressing, that support and solidarity, in whatever way feels natural to you to do, it means a lot.
That's yeah, that's it. So Signal Boost, make sure you Signal Boost the organization if you can't help monetarily. Donate your time if you have the time to do so. And yeah, that's amazing. Miles Markham is the development coordinator for Trans Lifeline. Just thank you so heckin' much for joining me today, and for sharing your truths and for giving us a little bit more information for your charity. We're now up to $1,010.10 for Trans Lifeline. And the way I see it is every donation helps. Every small donation is going to go to the organization. And the vast majority of the funds that they take in go back into the community in the terms of helping people, actually helping real people with some with issues that they are uniquely situated to helping, and that's such an amazing thing. Miles, thank you again so much for joining me
Thank
today.
you. Yeah, enjoy the rest of your stream. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much. All right. So hey, if you're in chat right now, remember that you can donate. You can still donate. We still have plenty of time as the stream continues. Let me slide on over here so you can see my screen. Again, if you haven't checked out Trans Lifeline, if you haven't checked out their website, oh my gosh, hold